I'm going to read you these stats here because, it wasn't just the finishing and it wasn't just Ferran Torres. It was Memphis. It was Dembele. It was Adama. It was that second half miss from Frankie de Jong. It was a lot of different instances where Barca could have put one home. So 68% possession, Domagoj. 15 total shots to 3. I've also seen 16 in places or 16 to 4. So whatever it is, 16 total shots to 4, 4 on target to 1, 13 corners to 1, 8 shots inside the box. But the number that really jumps out to me is 3 for 42 on crosses, good for 7% completion in that category. When I read those stats to you, I think the possession jumps out a little bit, and the total shots jump out, but I think we probably should need to tactically start this with that conversation about crosses. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you get with the Adama-Araujo, isn't it? I mean, we were very focused on the flanks, and I keep just to touch upon Adama-Araujo for a little bit. I keep telling people in regards to him, what you see is what you get. He's not really a versatile dynamo on the flanks, but he is very good at what he does, even if what he does is in essence very simple. I don't really want to criticize him too much because he's been very effective and a kind of breath of fresh air, if you will. But I'm also pretty confident that Xavi will want to, upgrade that position. Adama might stay as a rotational option, but he's not the one to take us to the next level on the flank. The main thing about his effectiveness is how the system is kind of designed to ensure the isolations he needs out wide. And Adama is virtually unstoppable when he's in that one-on-one scenario and he has space to run into and stuff. But that's why he's been excelling in Xavi's system, because Xavi's Barca are much more inclined to hit in transitions than some of the previous iterations of the club under other coaches. And there's also nothing wrong with that. And when you combine it with the elite structure that kind of evades pressure and builds up efficiently, you get the winning formula. However, against deep blocks and very compact blocks that don't leave much space to run into, when you have to create that space to the positional play, Adama is far less effective because that's where suddenly some of his major flaws are exposed. I would say that he's not really suited to a possession-heavy system that will see him have a lot of the ball and that will require him to kind of be a part of a complex sequences that will unlock those deep blocks. So far, this hasn't really been highlighted because his role has been very simple and Barca have had the space to kind of eject him into. But he's kind of one-dimensional in what he does because he will beat you to the outside and he will use his running and carrying power on the byline to get into positions to cross. But this means he's not really flexible. He did pretty well to get into decent positions and occupy spaces well. That sort of one-trick pony skill set is what limits him and limits players around him as well. As you mentioned, Dest at the beginning, this sort of movement and just one-dimensional movement is what limits Dest, who can operate at multiple angles, for example, but he cannot because Adama is always in front of him and always in that same position. And then you have the number three issue, which is kind of what you alluded to as well. That's the final product thing. It's very shaky. On a large scale, he will mostly overhit those crosses, and he hasn't got a really good ball striking technique either to be a direct threat himself. So that's the difference between having Adama-Araujo as your long-term solution at right wing and having an elite right winger who can take Barca to the next level.
Yeah, well, I'm going to use Adama. I think it's interesting you started with him because I think the issues with Barcelona, then not to say that he's in the center of them. This is not a blame on Adama-Araujo, but you can explain a lot of the other issues or a lot of the other good things that Barca did well off of Adama-Araujo because of the importance of that right wing. And where we start with Adama is that in the first half, he was 7 for 7 on his dribbles, but then he didn't do that in the second half. He was not as good and efficient in the second half. And if Adama had his first half in the second half, Barcelona would have scored a goal. There's a lot of what ifs in that scenario where if he was actually a player that kind of, not to say lowered his level, but was not as good in the second half. And certainly those crosses were left some things to be desired. But around him, some of the issues, I think we immediately talk about Nico Gonzalez being the interior right next to him. And less so than Dest. As I'm watching, I'm like, why isn't Dest doing more or whatever? But it really does come down to Nico and why his balls were so, not say even rough, but he did have a rough 45 minutes. It didn't really make a lot of sense. And there were things that he wasn't doing or he wasn't doing well enough. For me, the most important or most significant issue with Nico yesterday was the weight of his passes. So for Adama-Araujo, he wants the ball either directly to his feet out in front of him or he wants to be able to run onto the ball. And Nico was not delivering his balls to Adama Traore with that kind of weight. He just wasn't putting the proper weight on it. He was, I think, risk adverse and afraid to make a mistake. He was afraid to overshoot Adama Traore. He was afraid to potentially put too much on it. And because, again, when you're on that touchline to touchline, those passes from the interior have to get to their target quickly, efficiently, and you cannot be in front or behind, because then that ball is going to go out for the opposition throw-in. So I think Nico was a bit risk adverse in that way. He also, though, wasn't making forward runs almost at all. And by not entering into that space in the half space, making that run into the half space, I should say, that's giving the defense time to bring the extra man over to Adama Traore. And it isn't pulling them in any way behind the play. And where that then moves back, again, we're starting with Adama and then make the spider web. We continue to go layer by layer, because then next to Nico in that first half being De Jong, we know that what he does well, but is get forward, get into space, find space, dribble into space, and he can also deliver some pretty good long balls too. But when he takes up space, or when he decides to make a move, a lot of times it'll be going to the left. Again, when he plays as an interior, he generally does play as a left interior. So a lot of the times his move is into that space when Ferran Torres would drop in deep. And then even though he was the quote unquote single pivot, De Jong would try to enter in that space. Meaning that when Barcelona do switch play, De Jong is now, as the pivot, shaded to the left, meaning that Nico is a bit more alone on that right side half, or the right half of the field, if you will. So then once again, Nico is being a little more risk adverse. He's not willing to take the space and take the chance, and we'll say make the mistake with the pass. And so I think Nico was just, we'll say, overloaded with the options he had, and therefore he didn't take those options. So I didn't think that he did anything particularly wrong. It was that what he didn't do is what did not allow Barca to break down Galatasaray. Because again, another reminder is that pivot of De Jong and then interiors of Pedri and Nico, plus having Dest as your right back, Alba as your left back, and Eric Garcia as your center back, that group right there, and I didn't say Araujo for a reason, that group right there did not concede in that first half, right? So there is some kind of silver linings here. That Galatasaray, they did not put one past Barcelona either, except for the offside goal in the second half. But that grouping itself was good enough defensively. And again, that's because Nico, I think, was afraid to take risks, and he wanted to be where he needed to be defensively. But then offensively, again, that system right there is not going to break anything down. And the next key is Araujo, but I've gone too long here, so we'll circle back.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it is true. I think Nico was very conservative in his movement and in his passing, which is kind of weird to me. Not as much with the passing, but with the movement, yes, because I'm used to seeing Nico make those runs. I'm used to seeing Nico actually have a shot from range even. And we just didn't see that yesterday against Galatasaray. I mean, when I scouted him before his jump to the senior team, I always felt like his passing needed more work. The weight of the ball, which you mentioned, and playing in first time to the correct target is something that he needs to improve. Yesterday, he found himself in quite a good positions and quite a few times as well to set up a very nice sequence of play, but he didn't really either have the confidence to do so or the vision to execute the pass. I mean, I feel like he does have the vision because he can make those passes. I've seen him make those passes before, even before the first team and in the first team as well. And again, I wouldn't really dwell too much on it because, but we also cannot really escape the fact that there is a lot of room to improve here, but he doesn't really have the continuity. I feel like he hasn't played that much in the Xavi. I mean, he does play almost every game, right? But he always comes in as a sub, which kind of seems to suit him at the moment, just coming in later on in the game and kind of bulldozing over everyone in midfield, which is another issue that maybe we need to touch upon maybe next time or sometime later. But I feel like that's one of the key things, that he doesn't have continuity, not as much, and he's also very young. I mean, maybe we shouldn't really expect every single midfielder we have just to explode to an incredibly high standard and retain that level consistently, like, you know, Pedri has done, for example. But that's exactly why I think the double pivot would help him, because he could be positioned deeper, so the need for overly creative passing would be somewhat less, and he could maybe still aid progression through his powerful runs, because what he does well is receive on the half turn, get rid of his mark, and then just just show that incredible straight line running and progression through, not through his passing, but through his runs. And I feel like that's still a powerful weapon that he can use and he can bring to the table, which is similar to De Jong, obviously. But that's also why I feel like in the double pivot, maybe he would be a bit better as well. And it remains to be seen whether Xavi actually sees him as an interior or as a pivot, because we keep getting different reports on that topic, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you bring up, I think what's important with Nico is that we saw, especially that goal, the comeback against Osasuna earlier in the year, that Nico is capable of being this big time player. There was an argument at some point this season where Nico is a Gabi, who is the real starter, and now we've gotten to the point where we completely landed on that Gabi is the player you start. You're even willing, I mean, that being Xavi is even willing to start him on the left wing, that being Gabi out of position, and kind of not to say ruin Gabi's chances of really affecting a game, but he's being less effective on the left wing, but he's still inserted in the starting lineup for Xavi because Xavi wants to have Gabi and all that he provides. And Gabi in the same way is a bit risk adverse with his passing, but it's in higher positions up the field. So the extra man is already available, right? The extra man is already being pushed into that third, where Nico is trying to connect play between the defense and the front line or out to the wings. And again, if you're not going to play that ball quick enough, even the safe pass, then you're not really progressing up the field in that unit. And to go back to the point about Nico being 20, yeah, he is 20. And Gabi broke our brains, and Pedri broke our brains, and Anzi broke our brains. And we don't understand that players have to improve or get better. And if they do, right, Pedri was like, oh, well, I mean, this is last year, or the year before. Oh, this guy's as good as we need him to be already. And now this year he's improved. Now we're like, oh, is he one of the best midfielders in the world, right? That's already the argument we're making. But Nico, hopefully he can follow some kind of linear progression. And unlike Adama-Traore that you said, the two times that he decided to invert and come infield, everything opened up, and Barca had two clear shots on goal the minute that Adama-Traore tried something different. But we cannot really truly rely on a 26-year-old. I mean, at that age, you still, in theory, should be entering your prime or are in your prime and should be able to adapt. Maybe Adama-Traore will adapt, but yes, we think the ceiling on how much he can adapt is limited, even if Xavi's able to get or convince him to invert a little bit more often, maybe 5 to 6 times a game instead of 1 to 2 or 0. In the case of Nico, though, I'm hoping that he's able to look at that film. We know that there are a lot of private conversations going on during training, and Nico also probably not going to be going out on the international break either. So I do want to I'll add these caveats too, the things that we're not seeing, that 2 weeks with Nico just sitting down and saying, hey, this is what happened against Galatasaray. Let's get you out of your own head and just kind of feeling the football and making the right decisions here. Now, I want to now move back to Araujo because it's all pieced together. You have Adama on the wing, and then I don't have much to talk about with Dest. I think you kind of summed up the ways in which he was limited, the ways he tried to invert, but because Adama is going to do the same thing every time, it does kind of make Dest look like he doesn't know what he's doing. But again, Dest, I think defensively was also where he needed to be. He got beat on that one long run by Takaglu, which was not great, but he tried to just be stronger on the tackle. And all Xavi does for Dest, I think, at halftime, and says, hey, you got to be stronger on the tackle there. You got to stick in. You got to make sure that, you got to keep your spacing correct. And he was better in the second half. So I really have nothing to add for Dest. But next to Dest, the right center back being Ronald Araujo, he wound up being the... it's so interesting too, because he just, you know where I'm going, because he just rejected that contract renewal. And then he has arguably his worst 45 minutes that he had, where I actually did think that, this is me projecting. I actually did think he was making a little bit of progress in the last few matches with that open space, because now teams know the game plan. You put your striker on the other center back, whether it's PK or Eric Garcia in this instance. You put your other striker there, and Torrent, who usually plays a 4-3-3, actually went with a 4-2-3-1, so that he could put his pivots or mark the interiors, that being Pedri and Nico, and then he was able to put that man in the middle on Frankie de Jong and kind of try to mark him out, leaving Araujo with. There were times 25 yards of space, right in front of him. Either take that space or use your passing. And I mean, Xavi said after the game that Araujo was not able to take that space. He did not find and then he did not understand that he was the open man, because Araujo was the open man. And then you have to take that space until somebody else comes to you. And then you have to find the third man run. Like that's what you have to do. That's what that position is necessary to do. And he didn't do that thing. And that's why he was taken off at halftime. So, usually under Koeman especially, Araujo comes off at halftime or comes off early because of some kind of knock. But this time it was actually off because of performance, which it's hard to say why that happens. But against a block like that, you're going to have to criticize Araujo. And that is when he's going to be let's say at his worst, but there is a world, a very realistic world, where Araujo is a better player against a Real Madrid than he is against a Cadiz, or he is against a Galatasaray in a low block, because he's not pushing Barca forward. He's not making Barca better. And he is the liability in that system, against that system, as opposed to against teams that are just going to be just superior, that are just going to be good, going to be athletic, right? He can step to Lewandowski, but he has trouble when a team is on the low block, and then it's a 3-on-2 the other way, because Barca have pushed too many guys forward to compensate for the fact that Araujo is not finding that space. And then what changed in the second half was clear. Eric Garcia then became the left center back, and the number of times that Eric Garcia got forward and then switched play over to Adama, that's why Adama was so wide open in the second half so often. And unlike when Nico was in the first half, why Adama kept receiving it in positions to immediately drive forward, because those were long switch balls from Eric Garcia, who also had 11 ball recoveries on his own, and it really had a fantastic day, almost making up for Araujo. But yeah, I mean, what do you think? I mean, Ron Araujo, we've done nothing but praise him all year. And now the second he asks for more money, and I also want to add the caveat here, he's not asking for too much money. He is asking for a comparable number to Ansu and Pedri, which I think is reasonable. It should be a little bit less, but I think that'll be in the negotiations. But the number that Barca reportedly offered him is way too low. And I think it would even be fair if the agent and Araujo were a little bit taken aback by how low that number was reported. But I don't know. Also, we don't know who leaked that information. But that said, Araujo, that contract negotiation should be done. This game is not going to go against him in that way. But this game is certainly proof that there is room for him to grow. I mean, there's a lot of room for him to grow.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I would still say he is our best defender, and he is someone who will most likely, hopefully, fingers crossed, lead our defense for years to come. And I feel like he does deserve a better contract, because he is on ridiculously low wages compared to his peers, and especially given the importance that he has within the squad. But yeah, as you said, it was a tough night for him because the opposition just did the homework, I would say. They were tightly marking Pedri and De Jong, while also keeping Eric Garcia's passing lanes completely shut, which wasn't the case with Araujo. They were just like, they were inviting him to step out because they were aware of his limitations. But I have to mention that his on-the-ball ability is slightly improving. I would say that he is more adventurous and more courageous than he used to be. He's not there just yet, but I feel like there are some signs of improvement, at least in his willingness to try and try and make those passes and even see those passes in the first place. But when he is the one tasked with primary progression and just the overall success of our whole first phase, when that depends solely on him and his quality, the quality of his exits with the ball, we struggle a lot. And that was really one of the main issues in the first half, especially. I mean, when he came out, when that load was on Eric Garcia's shoulders, paired up with Piqué, it looked much smoother. But we saw Araujo driving possession because he was given that space to run into, which to me it seemed like it was really done on purpose. So rather than collapsing onto him immediately, they were just letting him step outside, leave his position, and then instead of just marked any obvious targets that were further out the pitch, and Araujo would still try and go for the vertical ball and try and break the lines. But one thing is playing that ball, playing that line breaking pass, and another is knowing when that's actually advantageous to your team. Because in Araujo's case, I think some of the passes which did find their targets were far from ideal because they were aimed at players who were not really in good positions to receive those passes in the first place. And I would say that that's partly on Araujo as well, yes, but also on the other players, especially the midfielders, for example, I mean, who had to open those channels for him to exploit. I mean, Pedri was still quite good in the night. De Jong was, in the first half, he was practically marked out of the game, at least the first phase of build-up. And Nico kind of struggled to move effectively to receive and to lay off the ball real quickly. As you said, when he did receive those balls, he was kind of sloppy and it was kind of slow to make that second pass. And in the second half, with the play flowing through Eric Garcia and the play going through Gerard Piqué at times, in the first phase instead of Araujo, we saw like an immediate improvement. Eric could switch sides, as I said, or thread those passes better and quicker to find priority target, to find Memphis, who would then lay it off to the wings. So then afterwards, Eric just went directly to the wings as well himself. Again, I feel like Araujo is getting there slowly. He is improving, and he's, even if it's just in his head, he's actually trying and he's actually attempting those passes much more than he used to. But there is obviously more room to grow, as you've said as well.